I am not going to introduce the next speakers. I'm very pleased that they're with us today, but I'm going to introduce a friend of mine, Professor Carole Meredith, who's been working with these gentlemen for quite a few years now, and I asked her as a special favor to do the introductions today and to tell a little piece of her part of the story. Carole?
Thanks, Deborah. When Deborah asked me a few months ago if I would introduce my friends, Ivan and Edi, I was just so pleased that she thought of me because I'm no longer actively working at the university. I retired, but I still like to feel a part of things, and this is a wonderful way for me to feel like I'm still connected to this, even though I don't have to go to the great effort of putting together a huge presentation. The reason I'm so pleased to introduce these guys is because when I reflect on my research career and of all the projects that I was involved in, there is nothing that has been more meaningful to me than this work to try to find the home of Zinfandel in Europe and to form the connections that I formed in the course of this work. This story is not just a story of science, it's also a story of synchronicity and of friendship. It was in late 1997 that I made contact with Ivan and Edi. And at that time, the synchronicity part of it is at that time, I really wanted to find the home of Zinfandel. And I had already been talking to Mike Gergich, who's here, about this, and I was quite certain that the home of Zinfandel was going to be in Croatia, and Mike had thought that for a very, very long time. And so I was thinking, well, how would I go about investigating this in Croatia? How would I survey vineyards? How could I do this as an outsider? At the very same time, Ivan and Edi, professors at the University of Zagreb, they had a new mission that they were about to embark upon, which was to begin to find and understand all the old traditional vines of Croatia, and Croatia is an ancient wine-producing country. It's in the Mediterranean region, been producing wine for thousands of years. And they really felt that the old vines of Croatia were at great risk. With globalization, there was a lot of economic pressure on Croatian producers to pull out their old traditional vineyards that were planted to varieties nobody had ever heard of and couldn't pronounce, and to plant Merlot and Chardonnay. And certain very large nurseries in Italy were more than happy to help them do that and sell them a lot of propagation material. And so because there was this concern that the Croatian varieties were going to be lost and at great risk, they had a project where they wanted to find what they had, understand it, identify it, and safeguard it. And so they came to me because we had a pretty well-developed DNA fingerprinting technology in my research group, and they thought that I could be of help to them. I just jumped at the opportunity to work with them because here was my entrance into the treasure trove of Croatian vineyards. So we began to work together. We connected electronically in late 1997, and in May of 1998, I went over there, the first of several trips, and we worked together quite regularly after that. And it worked out so well. Their objective was to characterize their varieties. My objective was to find Zinfandel. They had access to the vineyards. I had the technology at the time. Now they have very well-developed technology themselves. It all worked out. They learned a tremendous amount about the Croatian grapes, and we found Zinfandel. If we had begun this project, first of all, if my interest and their interest had not been synchronous, we never would have made the connection. If we had started the project a few years later, it would not have been successful because in the end, they were able to find very few vines of Zinfandel remaining in Croatia. A few years later, perhaps none of them would have been there, and the project, from my perspective, would have been a failure. So we came together at the right time. We had complementary objectives, complementary contributions that we could make. Our timing was right. The whole thing worked. And now, with the discovery of Zinfandel in Croatia, there is, of course, renewed interest in the variety because there's full recognition on the part of the Croatian wine industry that this is a variety that is of global interest. So here, they don't have to go plant Merlot to become part of the global wine community because they have Zinfandel. They're the home of Zinfandel. They can attract visitors. They've attracted a lot of interest already to their wine industry. Edi and Ivan, over the last few years, as they will tell you, have begun to establish trials in cooperation with producers and are on their way to the revitalization of Zinfandel in its homeland, Croatia. And I think that we can take some satisfaction in that if it had not been for the great success of Zinfandel in California and then our interest in finding its name, its home, perhaps it never would have been rediscovered in Croatia. So this is just a great example. It's been so significant to me because it's a great example of a partnership and of what started out to be just honest scientific cooperation that is now having some economic impact, and I think that we can really say that this work has made a difference. So I'm very happy to introduce to you two guys who have become good friends of mine now. We've known each other for almost 10 years. I think we have a lot of trust and good friendship and very warm feelings that have built up among us. And so Ivan first and then Edi are going to tell you their side of the story of the past, present, and future of Zinfandel in Croatia. Ivan Pejic.
Thank you, Carole, very much for a very nice introduction. Before I start, I would like to thank the organizer, especially to Dr. Deborah Golino for inviting us and giving us this opportunity to talk to you. As you might notice, English is not my mother language, so I have prepared a lot of pictures in my presentation, so I hope you will be able to follow me. The content of this presentation is divided in two parts. The first one, I will start with the first half, and I will tell you a few words about these basic facts on Croatia and its viticulture. Then I will just briefly pass through genetic evidences of the Croatia as a place of origin of Zinfandel, and a few historical evidences of its growth, and then also some data of field experiment we have started there after we discovered it used to be grown there in the past. And also a few words about its propagation since that time. In the second part, Edi is going to tell you about the future of this variety, how we see it in our country in the next period, and also first experience with both viticulture and winemaking, what we know so far. Edi, at the end, I think the most interesting part will be wine tasting of first samples of this of the wine of this variety, and direct offspring of this variety at the moment, the major red variety in Croatia, Plavac Mali. I will just make very short introduction to present you our country. Croatia is very small and very young country in terms of independency. We celebrate this year 15 years of independency. We are just 13% of area and more or less also population of California. Our capital is Zagreb. That's where we live. It's about 1 million people. And you will see it is very interesting in terms of climate and relief because it's very diverse country. We have almost all climatic conditions there, and consequently we have very diverse wines. We have two main viticulture regions in Croatia, which is the so-called continental part on the north and coastal part, and also 12 sub-regions within each of them. Our annual production is about 1.6 million hectoliters of wine per year, and as you can see, about 1/3 belongs to reds and 2/3 at the moment to whites. And also, you can see that we export only 30,000 hectoliters and import 5 times more, which means that we do not produce enough for our own consumption. I will not talk too much about the Croatian history and but I have to stress that the best days of Croatian viticulture were some 100 years ago, on turn of 19th to 20th century, and it was the time when the phylloxera attacked the Europe, the France, Italy, Spain, and it came a little bit later to Croatia, and in that moment we made a big benefit out of it and had almost 500,000 acres of vineyards. It happened but it was just a short period, because the phylloxera, of course, came to Croatia as well, and it caused also severe losses. And since that time, we have a constantly decrease of the areas under vineyards, and at the present we have about 45,000 hectares, which is approximately 110 acres. But since last 2-3 years, it is a slow recovery, and the areas are increasing every year. So as I said before, very different climate and very different wines in the northern part, where we can have very severe winters and quite sharp winters, and in the coastal part, which is under the Mediterranean climate, of very, very different growing conditions. At the moment, as you can see, we have approximately 600 producers and more than 1,700 different labels. We used to have a lot of varieties. There is some officially variety list, but our estimate is that we at the moment have in our vineyards about 250 varieties, and at approximately 50% of them are native varieties, which are grown only in Croatia and nowhere else. But only 10 to 15 varieties are actually economically important out of this, native ones, and we think and we believe that some additional 10 to 12 deserve to be. Here is the list. I'm not going to read it, of the 30 most important red varieties in Croatia, and they are in the order of their importance. On the first place, it is Italian Riesling, which is grown in the northern part of the country, and as you can see, in the second place is the Plavac Mali, which is our native variety, and all those in blue letters are actually native varieties, and it's approximately 50% of them, but their importance is even higher if we consider the rank. So, but we are not really dealing too much with these 30 varieties. We are primarily focused on those who are really endangered, which are underutilized, and we believe they deserve to be involved in our viticulture. Probably the best example is Crljenak Kastelanski, the synonym of Zinfandel or Primitivo, which used to be almost eradicated as a variety, and as Carole said, but looking at that genotype here in California or on the south of Italy, we can see that's an economically very important variety, which means that the current status of some varieties not correspond necessarily with its value. So our mission generally is revitalization of Croatian native underutilized grape wine cultivars. That's what we do, Edi and me, as a team. As Carole said, our collaboration started in the May of 1998, when she came for the first time in Croatia, and at that time we started to collaborate and became a part and created an international team, let's say. I'm not going to talk about the discovery because it's already known story. I will just briefly summarize what we have concluded out of that research. So as a first conclusion, after Carole took more than 150 samples of Plavac Mali wines taken from many different vineyards, it was very clear after the analysis was done here at UC Davis that Plavac Mali is not Zinfandel, which used to be claimed by some people before. But soon after when we had a little bit more close look at the data, which could be interpreted in many different ways, we realized that Plavac Mali is actually a close relative of Zinfandel, which means that they are related as a father and son, or father and daughter. So which means in a first knee of genetic relationship. And it took some time, but some year later, we have discovered that actually Zinfandel is a parent of Plavac Mali, our major red variety. And the second parent was also one very rare native variety called Dobricic. The problem was that at that time, we couldn't find Zinfandel in Croatia, so we had to solve the parentage of our major red variety, but we couldn't find another second parent. So we continued to look for Zinfandel at Croatian coast for several years after Carole left. And finally, 3 years later, we find only few wines at one place, a nearby Split in Dalmatia, and confirmed that its name was Crljenak Kastelanski, and we confirmed by DNA test that it is the actually synonym. They share the same genotype. They are the same cultivar. So it was known from before. Carole solved that also in 1996, that Zinfandel is the same cultivar as Primitivo, and now we were able to add another third synonym called Crljenak Kastelanski in year 2001-2002. So we have concluded that actually Zinfandel, Primitivo, and Crljenak, we simply put ZPC, is actually one cultivar with three different names. We can say three different clones or three different group of clones, as we could see from some other presentations. So to help to understand this, I would like only to remind you that each variety we have today began as a single wine developed for a single seed. And after the subsequent clonal propagation, vegetative propagation, its population increased. It's a history. Each variety is propagated by centuries in many different places, and they created large populations. And some of them, of course, some individuals mutated, then they developed clones and kind of populations. I would like to stress that we do not think that the Zinfandel is Croatian variety necessarily, because it used to be found in several other places. Some 2 years after we discovered Zinfandel in Croatia, one colleague from Germany, Andreas Jung, found the Zinfandel in some German vineyards nearby Heidelberg. And it was quite old vineyard, and he found several wines, I think even more than we have in Croatia at the moment. Also, I heard some rumors, I didn't read anything about it, but I got some information from colleagues from Hungary that they have found it also few wines somewhere. Very recently, I saw the manuscript of the paper, which is going to go out very soon, from the colleagues from Montenegro, which is the also neighboring country of Croatia, more on the south along the eastern coast of Adriatic. They found a cultivar called Croatia, which shares the same genotype as Zinfandel and as Crljenak Kastelanski. And I found also last summer during my vacation one wine on the island of Lopud nearby Dubrovnik. But we still have to confirm that and to have a closer look had a wine and to search that about. So what I wanted to say with this is that that variety traveled a lot, same as it came almost 200 years ago to California, probably a little bit earlier to south of Italy. It could be found in many different places. So how can we claim that it has Croatian origin? One thing to add to all this data is that I have been visiting the institute in Newberg in Austria a few years ago, and my colleague there, Dr. Ferdinand Regner, gave me this map to see it. It's the map of the collection of grape varieties. They had to be kept nearby Vienna, around one monastery there, and a school of viticulture actually in Newberg. And at this experimental field, in a very upper left corner, there were several rows of cultivars originating from Croatia. This morning, Mr. Sullivan told us that it used to be that time one empire, and it was quite natural to have all different varieties collected in one grapevine collection in Austria. So as you can, I don't know if you can read, but under the E and F, two neighboring groves were Crljenak and Plavac Piccola. In Italian it means Plavac Mali, Plavac the small. So which is the synonym actually for Plavac, what we have in Croatian language. So I'm not sure if that Crljenak is actually Zinfandel, because they don't have this material anymore. They have only the map remaining. But it's one evidence more that that variety at that time was popular, known, and spread in the empire. So I'm coming now to explain why we claim it is most likely it is originating from the south of Croatia, is because besides the Zinfandel is the parent of our most important major red variety, Plavac Mali, which we know it is old at least 200 years because we have written documents mentioning Plavac Mali production. It is in the same time in the very same relation with the cultivar Plavina, which is also an offspring of Zinfandel, so which means second child. And we have another three varieties which are related in a way that they can be offsprings of Zinfandel, and one of them even might be the parent. Because until we have the second parent, we cannot know exactly which one is the parent, which one is the offspring. I especially emphasize the Grk, the very old variety grown on the island of Korčula, which by the name suggests it might be from Greece, might be ancient introduction from ancient Greece. And this variety is very interesting because it has female flowers, and it needs to have a pollinator to be fertilized, to have berries. So which means that each seed of that variety is cross-pollinated. And what we learn with this analysis, and what Carole already done before with Cabernet Sauvignon parentage, with Chardonnay parentage, and other cultivars, they are always the result of cross-pollination. In spite that most of grape varieties are self-pollinated, which means there is a great chance that Grk might be the parent of Zinfandel. And we have also analyzed their chloroplast, microsatellite chloroplast genome, which is inherited only by mother, which is transferred to the offspring through the mother, and these two varieties share the same chloroplast haplotype. Of course, I have to say that it could be opposite. Zinfandel still can be the parent of Grk. So, as a result of this research, we published that several years ago. Carole made a very interesting graph with a possible history of Zinfandel, and he tried to explain how it could happen. So this hypothesis is that some centuries ago it used to be one variety, whatever we call her, on the Dalmatian coast of Croatia, and at one moment someone took the cuttings and took it to the south of Italy, and we have plenty of historical evidences testifying that there were migration from Dalmatia to the Pula region when the Turks were invading the Croatian territory. And also at a certain moment it somehow came to the North America. It could be in a way, as Dr. Sullivan proposed, this is not in conflict with that at all. And probably at a certain moment it happened, a spontaneous cross between Crljenak and Dobricic, and Plavac Mali was born. And then we speculate that probably Plavac Mali prevailed as a variety by the time. So it was about the past. And what about present of Crljenak Kastelanski? When we discovered first wines, we said we don't want to do it in a way to create another mystery. And then we very clearly, very transparently, by the help of David Gaze from Ridge Vineyards, by the help of Carole and Deborah Golino from FPS, decided to introduce legally our cuttings of our wines here at UC Davis. And they are now in the program of virus elimination, and they are going to become publicly available in a few years, also for Californian growers and also for Croatian growers. So this is an intentional introduction, and we exactly know who, when, and why. The reason we cannot spread it faster, it's because they are infected with many viruses, so we have to be cautious and have to be patient and wait and to pass the cleaning program and be available for growers. After we found the first 9 wines, because in year 2002 we have detected only 9 wines in one single vineyard. It was the mixed vineyard with many different varieties, and there we found it as Crljenak Kastelanski, and that's the name which went into the world and became the known synonym of Crljenak Kastelanski. But a year later we have found the same cultivar with the very same genotype under different name called Pribidrag, some 40 kilometers away from Kastela in a village called Svinišće, and a year after in another close village called Marušići, additional 13 wines. So in total we have detected so far only 25 wines, and we started to propagate them in spite of those viruses because we want to save them. But we also did some historical search through the documents, and we were lucky to find some papers talking about cultivar called Tribidrag, which is very similar to the name Pribidrag, which used to be widely grown in Dalmatia in 15th and 16th century. We were very exciting about these texts explaining how that wine was so popular in the Middle Age and was exported as a famous brand, almost like a Chardonnay nowadays, exported to the Venice, which we compare with the New York today or LA in terms of cities. So it was a text about, actually about Croatian nobility, some counts of that time which used to have properties, and they grown that cultivar and that wine and made a big business out of it. And later on we concluded that probably Tribidrag is actually the prime name, in the oldest name of this variety. We were also very lucky, sometime later after that, we get in contact with this guy on the picture, which is the head of the Natural Museum in Split. And we found out somehow that they're keeping original herbarium with many leaves and descriptions of old native grapevine cultivars, which was made by Stjepan Bulić, famous ampelographer, which made one wonderful book describing old Dalmatian cultivars almost 100 years ago. And they were so kind to provide us with one leaf of each of them, and we took some leaf samples out of these almost 90 years old leaves, dried leaves, and we are at the moment trying to extract DNA and to reconstruct the genotype of this variety. According to leaf, all of you who are familiar with Zinfandel and also descriptions we found along with it correspond very well to Zinfandel wine. So we usually say here in California you are always wonder how Zinfandel came into California, and it's a kind of mystery. We have our own mystery how it disappeared. If it used to be so good, so important variety, why it disappeared so? So that since we know that it was spread already before phylloxera attack, we assume that the first hit to it was the the new diseases introduced from North America, primarily powder and downy mildew, which came in the second half of 19th century. And also, when phylloxera came, it was great shock, and in a period when we learned how to graft, how to save varieties, probably the Plavac Mali was already established as a more resistant, more successful variety. That's our guess. So after that, we just proceeded with plans how to revitalize this variety again, to bring it back to our growers. Idea was actually born 5 years ago when we were here at first symposium. Carole, David, and Edi and I, we were talking what to do now, and we decided to organize one, to make one experiment, comparative experiment with Zinfandel, Primitivo, and Crljenak clones at one site in Croatia. And next year, David came in first visit in Croatia, and we have traveled around, we have visited different areas in Kastela and also on the island of Hvar, and we were lucky to meet a guy quite right on this second picture, Mr. Zlatan Plenković. We are going to taste his wine, I think is the number 3. And he offered us the land and the help to plant the vineyard in nearby his winery on the island of Hvar, which is very unique position. You will see some pictures more. And this is just a scheme of the experiment where David Gates provided us with Zinfandel 01A clone and Primitivo 03 from UC from FPS. And we also produced some Crljenak Kastelanski wine, and also Plavac Mali, Dobričić, Grk, and all other related varieties. So we have all family in one place now, grafted on 1103 rootstock on the island of Hvar. It was done in year 2004, and there's a few pictures of planting. You can imagine how high is that and how steep. It's hard to imagine from pictures, you have to be there. On the lower picture you can see the position of our experimental vineyard, and second picture is view from the vineyard down. A year later, the plants are already there. It is not snowed down, it's a stony soil. We have just so many limestone at that position, so it is during the summer, it is very hot. There is no irrigation. Can be very hot, can be very windy, so it's not easy to survive, and only grape wine can survive here. I like this picture. You can see the southern side of the island of Hvar and positions where vineyards are. The wine number 3 and also the wine of Crljenak are coming from this position. So we have wanted to compare, besides the clones of Zinfandel, Primitivo, and Crljenak, also Plavac Mali as a major and leading variety with this old new variety we are trying to introduce, to get back. So we had some first preliminary experiment last year. Since I already explained, it is very tough conditions. There are very tough conditions for growing. Plants are not so high, and we had very limited yield. We did some very modest ampelographic analysis of the first wines, and as you can see, basically the leaf shape is more or less the same for all three clones. Also, we have watched on the bud burst development, and as you can see, on the very same day, they are more or less advanced in the same way. This was very, very preliminary, and I ask you to don't take these data very seriously. We have to be very prudent with them. But in this first year, based on some 20 or 30 clusters, we have found a little bit higher sugars in Zinfandel than in Crljenak and Primitivo. It's a little bit opposite than here in California. But as I said before, we have to be very careful with this data, just to show you what we are going to do in coming years. And also, as you can see, the Crljenak looks to be best adaptive, what is expected actually, had the biggest average size of clusters, and also consequently the smallest berry weight because they have very small berries. We have compared also Zinfandel and Plavac Mali, and there is apparent difference in the start of vegetation. Also in flowering time, Zinfandel is several weeks earlier. And also in veraison, you can see on the 3rd August, Zinfandel is already fully colored, and Plavac Mali just starts with veraison. So, it is not too much to show you. I'm sorry, we do not have yet enough data, but in incoming years we will be able to report much more, much better in terms of how they differ. Now, my colleague Edi Maletic will continue, and at the end of presentation we will give you answer on your questions. Thank you for your attention.